Welcome to Heart Over Gold, the channel where love, kindness, and humanity shine brighter than any fortune. In today's story, Serafina Vance, once a silent wife to tech mogul Adrian Vance, is fed up with living in his shadow. After discovering his infidelity with Chloe Davies, Serafina decides to take control of her life. 6 months pregnant and armed with evidence, she confronts Adrian at the airport, exposing his lies and securing her future. This story of quiet revenge and personal strength is about reclaiming power and finding peace, as Serafina steps into a new chapter, leaving behind the man who tried to erase her. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, and keep up with our latest stories. The smooth marble floors of the exclusive London airport shimmered under the soft lighting. Adrian Vance, a tech mogul who made headlines with just a glance, strolled through the space as though he owned it. By his side, Chloe Davies looked every bit the part in oversized sunglasses and a custom white jumpsuit. Her heels clicked faintly on the polished floor, and she laughed a little too loudly at something Adrian had barely spoken. He flashed a smile, exuding the effortless arrogance of someone accustomed to having the world cater to his every whim. The staff at the luxury terminal barely acknowledged them. They'd seen people like them, powerful figures and their companions, coming and going constantly. "The jet is ready, Mr. Vance," the concierge announced, motioning toward a velvet rope corridor. Adrian gave a casual nod, a silent expression that spoke volumes. "I'm wealthier than you, but I'll pretend I'm not." He leaned closer to Chloe, whispering, "Next stop Paris. No room service, no headlines, no Serafina." Chloe smiled, though her fingers briefly tensed on his arm. She glanced around quickly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. They reached the end of the hallway, where a sleek Gulfstream G700 stood waiting on the tarmac, engines softly humming. The door to the cabin opened as though inviting them into a secret world. The scent of jet fuel mixed with expensive perfume filled the air. Adrian took a confident step toward the stairs, his pace smooth, his jaw firm, every inch the man who had graced the cover of Forbes. Then, the loudspeaker crackled to life. "Mrs. Serafina Vance, please report to Gate C." The voice was crisp, emotionless, but it felt like a knife. Chloe froze, and Adrian's foot hovered in the air for just a moment before it slowly returned to the ground. He turned his head, as if he hadn't heard properly. The announcement repeated, sharper this time. "Mrs. Serafina Vance, your immediate presence is required at Gate C." Adrian's smile wavered for a split second, and his eyes scanned the terminal, a brief flicker of doubt in his gaze. Chloe turned to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "They just said it's a coincidence," Adrian muttered, his jaw tightening. "She's not supposed to be here." He took another step, but this time it wasn't quite as smooth. His gait faltered, a rare crack in his usual composure. Then, just as he reached the first step to the jet, a security officer emerged from a side corridor. Tall, in a neatly pressed uniform, his face unreadable. "Mr. Vance," the officer said, "I'm going to need you to hold for a moment." Adrian blinked. He hadn't been asked to wait in years. The hum of the jet's engines felt distant now, as if the world around him had suddenly grown far away. Chloe stepped back, her sunglasses coming off for the first time. "Adrian, what's going on?" Adrian didn't answer. His gaze was fixed past the terminal doors, where a woman, cloaked in a long coat with her face hidden by a hood, had just entered. Security cameras followed her every step. Serafina's vengeance, silent but deadly. 2 days earlier, the Vance penthouse had been eerily quiet, the morning light spilling across the minimalist decor. Serafina Vance sat at the kitchen island, sipping her chamomile tea, her silk robe draping over her 6-month pregnant body. Her calm exterior belied the storm brewing inside her as she stared at Adrian's iPad. The first buzz at 5:47 a.m. had been ignored, but the second came with a preview. "Don't forget the white dress. Capri is waiting." "Me too. Kisses C." The teacup clicked against the counter. Serafina didn't flinch. She opened the thread, her eyes scanning a month's worth of intimate messages. One line standing out. "I can't believe you sleep next to that pregnant whale." Without blinking, she placed the iPad down gently, as though disarming a bomb. For a long time, there was only silence. The baby monitor in the nursery hummed softly in the background. At 8 a.m., Serafina sat across from Ms. Reynolds, a no-nonsense private investigator with gray hair. After a brief moment, Ms. Reynolds glanced up from the printed screenshot Serafina had handed her. "Do you want me to follow him?" she asked. "No," Serafina replied calmly. "I need to know how long it's been going on, where he's taking her, and if this has happened before." Ms. Reynolds nodded. You're not the first wife I've worked with. Mrs. Vance, Seraphina's lips curled, but it wasn't a smile. I doubt many have had to do this while pregnant. Ms. Reynolds didn't flinch. You'll have something by tomorrow. Back at home, Adrian came downstairs, freshly showered, his damp hair still sticking to his forehead. Seraphina looked up from the living room, her eyes soft and her voice steady. Are you leaving? She asked. Investors' summit in San Francisco, he replied, buttoning his jacket. Just for 2 nights. Have a good trip, she said, her tone sweet. Text me when you land. He kissed her forehead, politely, as if it were a formality, and left. Seraphina stood by the window, watching as his black car vanished into the city traffic. She continued to watch, even after it disappeared around the corner. That night, as she lay in bed, her hands resting on her growing belly, her phone buzzed. A message from Ms. Reynolds. They're flying to London tomorrow. Final stop, Paris. You were right. Seraphina exhaled slowly, the calm determination never leaving her face. 2 days later, at the private airport, a woman in a long coat with her face hidden by a hood entered. Chloe Davies walked into the VIP lounge with the air of someone who belonged there. Her head held high, her back straight, and lips painted with a nude gloss that matched her manicure. She looked over at Adrian, smiling as if she had just claimed her prize. This was the moment. He had said it, hadn't he? Once the baby's born, I'm done pretending. Chloe had waited for almost 10 months for those words to be followed by action. Her friends had warned her, scoffed, said, he'll never leave his wife. But Adrian Vance wasn't just any married man. He was Adrian Vance, a billionaire visionary, and he had chosen her. They sat in the roped-off section of the lounge, and the waiter brought champagne. Adrian declined, but Chloe raised her glass, clinking it with a soft smile. To freedom, she whispered. But beneath the smile, something flickered in her eyes. Because no matter how many times Adrian kissed her neck or promised her sunsets in Italy, a memory from 3 years ago kept resurfacing. Another man, another relationship, and another lie she had believed. That one had ended with a restraining order and a whispered warning from a woman who had appeared, broken and trembling, at Chloe's door. Do you think you're special? I thought so too. Chloe had never told Adrian about that chapter, just as he hadn't told her everything. But in their world, secrets were currency. Across the terminal, beyond the frosted glass that separated luxury from the ordinary, Daniel Hayes, Adrian's personal assistant, sat on a bench, nervously scrolling through his messages. Daniel hadn't been invited on this trip, and that alone raised a red flag. Adrian always took him. Always. Until now. The folder beside him was marked with flight manifests and legal notes. He hesitated before opening it. The subject of last night's email again. Adrian Vance travel documents. Ensure IDs match. If anyone asks, it's a tech summit. Nothing personal. Leave no trace. Daniel had forged things for Adrian before. Fake alibis, leaks to the press. But this was different. This was international. And then, there it was. Chloe's boarding pass. A different surname. Adrian had claimed it was a glitch. But Daniel knew better. It wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. This wasn't just a holiday. It was a clean break. Daniel watched as Adrian laughed with Chloe. He didn't look like a man about to embark on a trip. He looked like a man on the run. The rain flattened strands of hair near her temple, but she didn't flinch. Her fingers trembled slightly against her stomach as the baby moved. A reminder of time passing. Elise had been the bold one, the fighter, the one who once told Seraphina, either you leave the man or you learn to make him regret staying. But Elise had never faced Adrian Vance. Not the way Seraphina had to. It didn't start with blatant lies. No, Adrian was smarter than that. It started with questions. Are you sure that's what they said? Maybe you misunderstood. Why do you always make things so negative? Then came the slow erosion of trust, of friendships, of access. One by one, her bank cards were consolidated. Her name removed from the company deeds, private meetings, private phones, private passwords. Adrian never raised a hand, never yelled. That would have been too obvious. Instead, he would humiliate her in boardrooms with condescending jokes, correct her grammar in interviews, make her seem fragile and foolish at public events, and the world adored him. Even when she cried, people would say, "You're so lucky. He's a genius." After Elise died, Seraphina stopped fighting back. She smiled for the cameras. She let herself become what Adrian wanted, a soft, pregnant, polished presence. But behind that quiet obedience, something darker was forming. Not bitterness, not even vengeance, strategy. That night, after returning from the cemetery, Serafina locked herself in the study and opened a drawer she hadn't touched in months. Inside was an old journal bound in worn navy blue leather. She opened to a blank page and began to write. Not to remember, but to document. "If anything happens to me, check this first," she wrote on the inside cover. Over the next hour, she detailed every change in Adrienne's behavior. Names, dates, events, bank transactions, voice notes. The house was silent except for the scratching of her pen. Then she moved to her laptop. Ms. Reynolds's updates were waiting. Timestamps, photographs, metadata of Adrienne and Chloe's shared hotel stays. Serafina didn't cry when she saw them. She barely blinked. Instead, she composed an email to her lawyer titled "Emergency Asset Freeze Urgent." She attached scanned copies of their marital agreement, prenatal documents, and photos of Adrienne boarding the jet with another woman. She didn't send it, not yet. Instead, she stood up from the desk and walked to the nursery. The walls were painted a soft sky blue. The crib was already assembled. Adrienne's mother's teddy bear was tucked neatly in the corner. Serafina stood there for a long time, one hand on her stomach, the other gently stroking the crib rail. "Someday you'll know the truth," she whispered to the child growing inside her. "But you won't grow up in fear of him. I promise." The next morning, Serafina woke up at 5 a.m. sharp. She packed Asmal carry-on, printed all the necessary documents, and retrieved a passport with her maiden name. Her ticket read Serafina Rodriguez. By 7:15 a.m., she was on her way to the airport. Her driver was instructed not to speak, and by 8:30 a.m., she entered the private terminal, her hood up and her face down. But on the inside, Serafina wasn't hiding. She was walking into battle. The soft ping of Serafina's encrypted inbox broke the quiet of the early morning. She was sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, her robe wrapped around her like armor, a glass of cold water untouched beside her. Subject: Surveillance package confidential from Monsieur Reynolds' investigations. Attachments: 7 files, password protected. She opened the folder with precise fingers, already knowing what she was about to see. Still, when the footage began to play, she leaned forward, calm, focused, and expressionless. Clip 1, a drone shot of a beachside cabin. Adrienne, shirtless, hands Chloe a drink. She laughs and climbs onto his lap. He kisses her shoulder. Date and time: last Saturday. Clip 2, a private dining terrace lit with string lights. Adrienne feeds Chloe a bite of dessert, his hand resting on her thigh. Chloe looks at a waiter as if she owns the world. Serafina paused there. She zoomed in. Clip 3, the airport valet. Adrienne and Chloe getting out of a black car holding hands. Her Louis Vuitton weekend bag, his custom leather duffel, matching, coordinated, careless. None of it surprised her. What did surprise her, what took her breath away for just a moment, was the ease of it. Adrienne wasn't pretending to be discreet. He wasn't even being cautious. He was already gone. She closed the laptop, her hands perfectly still. She didn't wipe a tear because there were none. That part of her had been emptied days ago, maybe even years. Instead, she stood, retrieved a folder from the console table, and pulled out a legal packet marked Prenuptial Agreement, Vance Rodriguez. She placed it next to the laptop. She opened a second file titled Financial Provisions, Child Custody, and began to type. At 7:43 a.m., an email was sent to her lawyer. Execute the emergency freeze on all shared accounts. Proceed with the trust enforcement clause. The documents are already signed. The move was legal, swift, and due to Adrienne's most recent transfer of assets to an offshore account, justifiable. The next step was quieter. She moved through the apartment, collecting only what mattered. A passport with her maiden name, a phone charger, the journal from the study, and a folded copy of the security footage. She put them in a small travel bag and sat on the edge of the bed, listening. The house was silent. Adrienne had not replied to her last text message. "Have a good flight." There was no reply, not even a blue checkmark. She put on a pair of low-heeled shoes and took a final look in the full-length mirror. Her face was unreadable, makeup-free, hair pulled back in a low bun, a scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, the kind of woman no one would stop at an airport. Before she left, she walked into the nursery. She tapped the mobile over the crib, setting it spinning with a faint sound. "I'll be back when I have control," she said softly. Not before. At 9:10 a.m., Serafina arrived at the airport with the name Serafina Rodriguez. She passed through security without a second glance, thanks to Ms. Reynolds' advanced planning and a discreet call to a trusted contact in airport security. Her seat was reserved in the private terminal's observation area, with a clear view of Adrienne's departure gate. She sat, crossed her legs, and drank tea as if she were any other traveler. Viewed across the terminal, a digital monitor blinked. Vance Flight 417, Gate B, departs 11:30 a.m. She opened her purse. Inside was a printed image of Adrian Shand resting on Chloe's back with the time and place stamped on it. It was time. The leather of the VIP lounge sofa stuck slightly to the back of Chloe's thighs as she adjusted her posture. Outside the panoramic glass, the tarmac gleamed in the pale morning light. The jets taxied by in silence, their engines distant and ghostly. Everything in the room, its hushed elegance, its imported air, was designed to make people feel important. But Chloe didn't feel important. She felt watched. Her gaze drifted to a woman on the other side of the room, young, maybe in her early 30s. Brunette in a worn denim jacket, pushing a baby stroller with gloved hands. She wasn't dressed like she belonged in the lounge, yet no one stopped her. No one questioned her. The woman wasn't talking. She wasn't checking a phone. She was just staring straight at Chloe. Chloe looked away, suddenly too conscious of her own posture, the curve of her shoulder, the trembling champagne glass in her hand. "Everything all right?" Adrian asked, looking up from his phone. She forced a smile. "Yes, just tired." He didn't press her. He just nodded, half distracted, and went back to whatever message he was typing. Probably to his pilot or some lawyer or maybe even Serafina. The knot in Chloe's throat tightened. She took her glass and excused herself to the restroom. Her heels clacked down the hallway, each step hitting the polished floor like a metronome. Inside the bathroom, she locked the door and leaned against the sink. She looked at her reflection. Perfect skin, defined cheekbones, a hint of gloss on her lips. But behind the face she had sculpted for Adrian's world, something cracked. And then came the memory. Uninvited, sharp. Years ago in Miami, another older man. A different kind of promise. Late-night scenes, whispered futures. You're all in need. Until the bruises started, until the locked doors and the phone checks in isolation. He had erased her name from the lease, canceled her cards. She didn't leave. She escaped. She thought Adrian was different, that his power came with protection. But power always has a price. Back in the lounge, Chloe's stomach churned. The way Adrian had been talking to her lately. The sudden silences. The gentle mockeries when she asked questions. The way he laughed a little too loudly when she suggested going public with the relationship. "We're not ready for that kind of noise," he had told her. "No, you're not ready." But was it really we or just him deciding which part of her could exist? She unlocked the bathroom door slowly, stepping out into the hallway. The woman with the baby stroller was gone. Disappeared. Maybe she was never there. Still, Chloe's nerves didn't settle. Cher turned to Adrian, who was now standing by the terminal window speaking quietly with someone on his phone. His back to her. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. No contact name. Paris. A single word. Simple. Loaded. She stared at it. Then she looked at Adrian. And for the first time, Chloe wondered not if he was lying, but what he was capable of if the truth got in his way. Love is not a game. It's an investment. How high are you willing to risk for something that is not guaranteed? Is the truth or the illusion more important? Comment below and share your thoughts. Subscribe for more stories. The Price of Silence and the Silent Victory. The automatic door sighed open as Serafina walked into the heart of the private London airport. The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead met hearers, and the quiet scuff of polished shoes echoed in the marble hallway. She moved like mist, her hood up, shoulders squared, one arm gently cradling the swell of her stomach, the other holding a worn leather travel bag firmly against her side. It was not fear she carried. It was focus. Near the end of the hall, two men and a woman in sleek navy suits stood in a quiet group. They held no signs, no name boards, no smiles. But as Serafina drew near, they suddenly straightened and one nodded. Mr. Harrison, her lead lawyer, stepped forward. "You made it," he said softly. Serafina did not break stride. "Where is the officer?" "Security has already been briefed. Officer Delgado will meet you at gates. You just need to hand it to him." Serafina reached into her bag and pulled out the manila envelope. Its seal already broken and resealed once for her review. Inside were printed photos, security footage with timestamps, a notarized declaration, an emergency injunction assigned, a temporary custody order, and a clause preventing international travel interference. Section 9B. "I don't want a confrontation," she said. "This is not a show. It is about control," Mr. Harrison nodded. "It will be clean." They walked together in silence, their footsteps muffled by the terminal carpet as they approached Gate C. Through a narrow glass wall, the edge of the tarmac gleamed in the morning light, and the distant tail of Adrian's jet peeked out from behind a private hangar. Serafina stopped near a discreet service counter where a uniformed security officer was reviewing a clipboard. He looked up as she approached. He was young, maybe in his 20s, but his eyes were sharp. "Ice advance?" he asked softly. "Rodriguez?" She corrected him with a quiet, bitter smile. Serafina Rodriguez. She handed him the envelope. These documents are sealed and verified. The injunction is active. The man boarding that plane cannot leave Spanish territory with a pregnant spouse under existing custody procedures. The officer opened the envelope, scanning the first page quickly, his eyebrows furrowed. It's all here. I'll have to step aside while I radio this in. No names over the loudspeaker unless necessary, she said softly. He does not need a warning. The officer nodded and stepped away. Serafina leaned back against the cool glass panel by Gate C, exhaling for the first time in what felt like hours. Her hand went back to her stomach. The baby shifted slightly as if feeling the tension fade. Behind her, Mr. Harrison handed her a sealed bottle of water. Once they confirm the documents with the supervisor, they will stop him right before he boards. Serafina didn't respond. Her eyes were now fixed on a reflection in the glass. Down the hall on the other side of the terminal, Adrian Vance appeared, taller than she remembered in this light, walking with that casual arrogance she once mistook for confidence. Chloe was at his side, her sunglasses on, oblivious. Serafina didn't flinch. The loudspeaker overhead clicked. Mrs. Serafina Vance, please report to Gate C. The last syllable of the loudspeaker resonated across the terminal's expanse of glass and marble like a gunshot in a church. Mrs. Serafina Vance, please report to Gate C. Adrian Vance stopped walking. One foot hung suspended over the jet stairway for a fraction of a second too long before slowly retreating, confusion clouding the easy smile that had carried him so far. Chloe looked at him, her expression expectant, then uncomfortable. Did they just say Serafina? She asked, her voice tense. Adrian didn't treply. His gaze was fixed across the terminal toward Gate C, where a small figure stood alone. She had taken off her hood. Her face was clear, her hand resting on her rounded stomach like a silent challenge. Serafina, without crying, without pleading, serene. She walked slowly, her heels marking an even rhythm against the tiled floor, her coat waving like a flag behind her. The lounge fell silent. Heads began to turn. Whispers rose like smoke. Chloe followed Adrian's gaze. At first, she didn't recognize the woman. This wasn't the sloppy wife she had imagined, the invisible, clinging inconvenience of Adrian's excuses. No. This woman was polished, in control, burning with something just beneath the surface, but never letting it show. Serafina stopped 3 Meller from them. She looked at Chloe once briefly. Then her eyes met Adrian's. You will not be taking my child to any country, she said. The words were soft, clear, final. Chloe blinked. Adrian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He took a step forward, attempting a smile, a hand raised in a fake act of surrender. Serafina, we don't have to do this here. You already did, she interrupted, her voice still even. You did it when you lied, when you used offshore accounts to hide assets, when you forged Chloe's name on travel manifests under your assistant's login, and when you booked a jet to leave the country with our unborn child without my legal consent. Chloe's head whipped around to face him. Wait, what? Adrian turned, panic flaring behind his eyes. That's not it. Serafina held up a document, a sealed injunction with legal bolding. Is exactly it. Effective immediately. You are barred from leaving the country with me or the child without a full custody review. Your international assets have been frozen. You can try to board that jet, Adrian, but you will not be welcomed in any court that investigates this. The tension broke as the security officer stepped forward. Mr. Vance, we need to speak with you in private. Adrian did not resist. He could not. His hand slowly dropped from the boarding stairway. Chloe stood frozen. Mascara smudged slightly at the corner of one eye. Serafina did not move. She simply turned, walking back toward Gate C with the same quiet grace with which she had entered. Every step was a statement in itself. The jet behind her remained idle, silent, waiting, irrelevant. The price of silence and the silent victory. The cameras of the paparazzi were not long in coming, and the clicking of flashes filled the air like static electricity as Serafina approached the microphone in front of her law firm's offices. The small crowd had formed hours earlier. Paparazzi, local press, bloggers with ring lights, and a growing sea of people live streaming, all waiting to see the woman who had grounded Adrian Vance. Serafina stood at this podium, flanked by her legal team with a slim folder under one arm. Her tailored navy coat hugged her body, and her hair, pulled back in a low bun, gleamed in the soft afternoon sun. The only jewelry she wore was her wedding ring, and she wore it on her middle finger. I never planned to speak publicly, she began, her voice quiet and measured. But silence is how men like my husband remain powerful. Silence is how the harm continues unchecked. A collective hush fell over the crowd. She continued, her gaze unwavering. I was married to Adrian Vance for 8 years. During that time, I endured a campaign of psychological erosion, not with fists, but with silence, with financial control, with constant doubt. She paused, letting the people take it in. Adrian Vance, a man who presents himself as a visionary behind closed doors, treated me like an obstacle. When I became pregnant, he told me I was an anchor tied to his potential, that I was a burden, that if I spoke, no one would believe me. The flashes erupted once more. Serafina opened the folder and pulled out several printed pages. Bank records, timestamps, reports from private investigators, these are just a fraction of the documents we are filing in court. They show a pattern: deception, coercion, attempts to flee with our child, and calculated steps to erase me from his life and his legacy. The reporters leaned in. The cameras whirred. Mouths were slightly open. My decision to act was not for revenge, she said. It was to protect my child and to reclaim the voice he had allowed himself to take. As she walked away from the podium, the internet had already exploded. Within 15 minutes, the hashtag #CourEdSerafinaSpeaks was trending worldwide. Media outlets began analyzing her every word. Clips were reposted, subtitles were added, translations were uploaded. At his company's headquarters, an emergency meeting was called behind closed doors. Several board members were already on calls with PR firms and lawyers. By evening, an official statement appeared on the company website. Effective immediately, Mr. Adrian Vance has been suspended from all executive duties pending an internal investigation. No signature, no apology, just distance. Chloe, somewhere in the city, watched the news from a hotel room window. Her name had not been mentioned in Serafina's speech, not once. It was both a relief and a sentence. She turned off the television and looked at her reflection for a long time. Then she put on a hooded sweatshirt, packed the little she'd brought, and slipped out the side door into the night. No one followed her. No one noticed. Back at the courthouse, Serafina stood quietly behind the building, the chaos fading behind the glass doors. Mr. Harrison approached with a satisfied nod. "You could sue him for everything," he said. "I don't want everything," Serafin replied. "I just want enough to build something honest." He did not ask what she meant. They turned toward the car, waiting at the curb. Serafina's hand moved instinctively to her belly. The press conference was over, but her life had just begun to unfold. The sunset dipped behind the city skyline, casting long amber streaks across Serafina's penthouse balcony. The soft hum of traffic barely broke the stillness of the air. She sat wrapped in a loose ivory cardigan, her legs crossed underneath her, a cup of lukewarm tea in one hand, the other resting gently on her belly. The chaos was behind her, at least the part with cameras, statements, and boardroom scandals. Today there were no reporters at her door, no legal documents sliding over mahogany tables. No more masks to wear, only quiet. Her phone buzzed beside her on the table. She let it vibrate once, then twice, before finally glancing at the screen. Messages from strangers, names she didn't recognize. "Thank you for speaking. You gave me courage. You made me feel seen. I left him because of you." She read them slowly, absorbing each one like a truth she didn't know she needed. None of these people knew her completely, and yet they understood something no one had seen during her marriage. The slow, invisible disintegration of a woman whose silence had been mistaken for her purpose. Serafina put down the phone and turned her face to the wind. A single tear rolled down her cheek, not of sadness, but of liberation. She thought of Chloe. No final words, no apology, just a shadow slipping into anonymity. Maybe that was mercy, maybe not. She thought of Adrian, suspended, disgraced, scrambling to secure a version of his legacy that no longer existed. His lawyers said he would likely settle, that he just wanted it all to go away. So be it. Serafina had no interest in revenge. That wasn't what this was about. She had done what she needed to do for herself and for the life she still carried. A small flutter beneath her hand and then stronger. Her hand pressed instinctively against her stomach. The baby kicked once firmly. She let out a breathless laugh in awe of the sudden action. "I felt you," she whispered. "You're here." She looked at the soft gradient sky over the city, the violet bleeding into gold. For the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel like she was losing something. She felt like something new had begun. Inside, the apartment was silent. The nursery was still half-finished-ish. The mobile over the crib was still waiting to be wound. But the house was hers now. And so was the silence. Not a silence enforced by control, but a chosen one, her own. She stood slowly from the chair, bracing herself as she rose. Her back ached a little and her ankles were swelling again. But she didn't complain. She walked inside, turned on a soft lamp, and opened the journal on the desk. Her journal filled with pages of truths she once only whispered to herself. She picked up the pen. "He tried to erase me, but this child is proof that I was never invisible. She signed it, dated it, and closed the journal. Outside, the stars were beginning to flicker, and inside, Serafina Vance, no longer a wife, no longer a pawn, was finally at peace. Remember, your story matters. Your healing journey inspires others.